With that, I would gladly invite our third speaker, Miss Mahjhrin, to deliver her sharing. And before that, Miss Mahjhrin, could you please raise your hand so that we can see. Okay, that's nice. Please welcome.
Thank you so much, Rihanna. Let me just quickly share my screen so we can begin. Okay, so today I'm actually going to be talking about the power of your voice, the power of your stories, and how using your voice and telling your stories can actually not only help you advocate for yourself, but it can also help you create change and impact in your communities. So some of you might be asking, what do our stories have to do with advocacy? Well, let me tell you a little story about myself first so you can understand what I mean. As Rihanna mentioned, I'm the founder of True Complexion, and I'm also an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and mental health. In 2019, I was one of the winners of the Women of the Future Southeast Asia Awards, and I was also part of the Obama Foundation Leaders Asia Pacific program. And that same year, I was in the US for 3 months because I was a part of the Eisenhower Global Fellowship Program. And last year, I actually had the privilege of becoming one of the faces of the IT Cosmetics regional campaign, where you can actually see my face when you walk into a Sephora outlet in Singapore or Malaysia. And just an additional fun fact, I'm also a performer. I perform in front of stages, in front of more than 3,000 people. And in 2016, the Scottish band Churches, I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with them, but they actually remixed one of my original songs that I wrote. If you look at my highlight reel right now, my life seems kind of cool because I get to do a lot of fun things, right? But the reality is, it wasn't like this until just a few years ago. You know, for more than 20 years, I really struggled with my identity. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had no direction at all. And the idea of telling my story, the idea of speaking up, it really didn't cross my mind at all, because the truth is, you know, I was so ashamed and embarrassed of who I am. And the reason because of this is because I was actually born with a birthmark on my face. And growing up, let me tell you, it was not easy. You know, kids in school were mean. I used to get teased and bullied a lot. They would call me names like Strawberry and even Two-Face, the supervillain from Batman, which is a photo that you're seeing on your screen right now. And strangers were not really kind either. You know, they would stop me in the street and ask me questions like, what is wrong with your face? Are you sick? Ew, are you contagious? You know, and as a young person, when you're still trying to figure out who you are in this world, and you keep getting told this story over and over and over again, that you're not good enough, that you don't belong, that you need to be fixed, you tend to believe it. And these stories that people kept telling me about who I am and what I was worth, you know, it really impacted every single aspect of my life, my body image, my mental health, my self-esteem, my confidence, everything. I started getting bullied when I was 5 years old. And it actually got worse as I grew older. You know, I became extremely insecure. I stopped looking in the mirror. I stopped taking photos. And I started trying out different whitening products, different treatments, different supplements, everything out there, because I was so desperate to get rid of this birthmark on my face. At the age of 11, I was already getting whitening injections, which is not a thing that any kid should actually experience, right? And it was also at that same year that I developed depression. I developed an eating disorder. I had suicidal thoughts. And later in my teens, I also developed an anxiety issue. And it didn't just end there. In my 20s, I'm not really proud of this, but I actually had a really bad drinking problem, because I had all these pent up emotions inside of me, all this pain that I was holding on to, and I didn't know how else to release it and let it out. So what I chose to do, what I knew how to do, was to numb my feelings by drinking myself till, well, I was really super drunk. You know, it was really bad at one point that I would actually get home after partying and I would pass out in front of the door in the front yard before I could even get my key through the door. or I would actually pass out in the shower. And my mom, she had to pick me up, get me dressed, and put me into bed. It was such a difficult period time of my life, not only for me, but for my family as well. If I'm being honest with you, I don't even remember my 27th birthday very much because I passed out before it was even midnight. But what I do remember extremely clearly is waking up the next morning in a panic because I didn't know where I was. But I turned to my left and luckily it was my cousin sleeping beside me and not a stranger. But that morning, I was so sick. I kept running back and forth to the bathroom because I couldn't stop throwing up. And it was so bad that my cousin actually had to take me to see the doctors. And it was there in that doctor's room, this small little white room in this small little white bed. I was there for 3 hours getting an IV drip to drain out the alcohol from my body. And it was there that I thought to myself, man, if I continue living like this, if I continue believing these stories that people told me about who I was and who I can become, honestly, I probably hurt myself even more, or maybe even worse. I might have actually killed myself. My story, my history is the reason why I do what I do today. It's the reason why I started True Complexion and why I advocate so passionately about mental health, about inclusion, about diversity. I started True Complexion in 2015, and every single person that I've spoken to about 250 people, and they've all told me that they too have been misjudged, and they too have been treated poorly, and they too have been misunderstood because they are different. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, why are we different? Who made us different? And it really has to do with the stories that have been passed down from one century to another, the stories that we have been telling each other from one generation to the next, the stories that you and I both grew up with. These stories are really damaging, and it's really stereotypical. The stories about people like me, people who have visible differences, people who have scars on their faces, we get categorized under one or two things. Number one, you're this victim who is in need of sympathy and in need of pity. The person that you say, oh, poor you, too bad that this happened to you, too bad you were born like this. And number two, we get viewed as the villain, the person who is scary and ugly and grotesque and threatening that you should actually stay away from. And apparently, because of the Two-Face reference, I fall under this category. And we see it all the time. You and I both watched fairy tales and cartoons when we were growing up that had these images, these narratives. Until today, we still see it in our advertising campaign, in our blockbuster movies. And women and young girls in particular were really affected by this because our bodies are constantly scrutinized and criticized by society. We're put into there's such a high expectation of how beauty should be perceived, like how we should be perceived like as women. And we wonder why so many of us feel like we're not good enough, feel like we don't belong. And we wonder why so many of us, we're trying so hard to fit into this little box that we don't belong in, because we want to be loved, because we want to be accepted, because we want to fit in with everybody else. It's a reason why I work with so many youths today, because I didn't have that support when I was younger, which I really needed. So right now, I provide training programs for youths and teens as well to help them navigate through their insecurities, their limiting beliefs, their body image issues, their mental health issues, so that they can actually learn the tools and tricks that took me more than 10 years to learn and understand and implement. So this was actually an event that happened last month. It was for a school in the UK, but it was broadcasted to over 25 schools in 5 different countries. And I don't only work with corporate companies and brands and schools, both locally in Malaysia and overseas as well. I also work with refugee youths to help them give a voice, to help them tell their story, to help them advocate not only for themselves, but for their communities. I love this quote by Maya Angelou. She says, I've learned a long time ago that the wisest thing I can do is be on my own side and be an advocate for myself and for others like me. This is actually exactly what I did for myself. And because of that, my life changed. Because of that, I could create an impact and influence other people in my sphere, in my community that are also struggling with the same things that I struggled with when I was younger. So if you have an SGD, a cause that you're already passionate about, that's really wonderful. But if you're still figuring out where you fit in this picture, I actually encourage you to be curious and ask questions and look at your own story and see how your story maybe can also influence other people who are going through the same thing that you go through. Like I started True Complexion with just telling my story with one person, but in 5 years, I've managed to create all of this for myself and for the people around me. So that's what I would leave you with today. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Rozella. I wish you love, joy, health, and happiness in your life. If you want to connect with me, these are all my details. I would love to hear your questions and I would like to get to know you better. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mahjhrin, for the previous session. And as I can see in the chat box, there is one question from our committee. Clarion, would you like to answer that?
What advice will you give if someone faces the same discrimination just because they are different? I think two things. Number one, you have to be really mindful of the community that you're around, the people that you're surrounded by. As I said, when I was younger, I wasn't surrounded by people who actually supported me, who understood me. And that's why I actually got into a lot of negative things. Not that those people were bad people, but they were also people who didn't know how to handle their own emotions, right? So it's really important for you to surround yourself with the right people. Look at the people around you. Are they actually supporting you? Are they actually putting you down and holding you back and holding you back from reaching your dreams and becoming who you truly are? If these are the type of people in your life, you may want to reconsider whether you want to be around them anymore, or whether you want to actually take a step back or remove them from your environment, because your number one job is to protect yourself. And number two, I think always just find your community, but number two, always protect yourself in the sense that make sure what you are exposed to is not making you feel worse about yourself, because sometimes we're on social media all the time, we're watching all these movies and exposed to all these images all the time. They actually make us feel worse about ourselves, so it's like adding layer on top of layer. And so really being mindful about who you follow on social media as well, being mindful of the content that you're feeding your mind with, what kind of books that you're reading, because these little things can also impact your body image and your mental health and the way that you see yourself. So making sure that your community is right, you have the right people around you, and number two, making sure that you're also controlling and minimizing your exposure to things that will make you feel bad about yourself as well.
Thank you so much for answering. And I have a question also from my part. And the question is, do you think that the mental support platform in Malaysia is easily accessible?
It's getting more accessible now. Back when I was growing up, nobody talked about therapy. I grew up in Kota Kinabalu, and it's a small town. I didn't even know if there was a therapist available. But right now, especially with the internet, everyone going, since the pandemic, everyone going virtual. There are so many options here. But of course, there are options that are free and options that are quite expensive for people to pay with. But there are support groups that you can actually join that could be really helpful. But I think the thing is we need to reduce the stigma about getting help, because a lot of people think it's such a shameful thing to do. It means that something is wrong with you. But yeah, I think there are options out there. You just need to find the right community and also the right budget that fits you.